Welcome to Transition Tuesday. My name is Laura Knapp. I'm one of the parent consultants here at Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. I'm the transition coordinator. And tonight we have with us Jen Sullivan to talk about college supports. We were very excited. And I will just turn it over to you, Jen. Thank you.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to present tonight. I've been very excited to speak to all of you on a really important topic and a topic that I work and talk to families and students about every day. I'm talking about college and how to get support in college. Next, please. Yep. So a little bit about me. I am also a parent. I'm a parent of two teenage daughters. Um, Maybe we all, as parents of teenage daughters, have that look as parents of teenagers. I'm also an author of the books that you see on the screen, a co-author as well of the books on the screen. One of the books is a book of advice and tips for students and parents. And there's a book that I've written as well that is a workbook that can be used in a classroom setting or in a transition program. And if anyone that is watching right now loves playing video games, the book on the bottom left is a free ebook that talks about college and introduces students to college concepts, but using examples in video games. So that's a great one to check out. I've worked in higher education and in transition programs for over 20 years. And I am the owner of Fast Forward College Coaching. We have an office in Waterford, Connecticut, and we do work with students virtually. And I'm very proud to say I'm also a Charting the Life course ambassador. And I know that there were a lot of great resources in the state of Connecticut about Charting the Life course tools. And I highly encourage all families who are here listening today to look into them. So I always like to start my presentations with good news. So the good news is there are lots of different ways to do college. Now, if you are a person of a certain age, some of us, when we went to high school, after high school, if you said you were going to college, it meant that you were going to college full time. And this meant that you were living on campus in a dorm, you had a roommate, and you were taking a required 4 or 5 classes, and all of those classes were in person. So that's what it used to mean to go to college. Today is a little bit different. So the good news is college can look different for every person, for every student. So the young woman on the left of the screen, this might be you. This might be your path. Maybe you want to try one college class. You want to attend that class in person on a college campus, but you want to live at home. Maybe, like the young woman in the middle, you want to go to college full time and you want to live on campus. And maybe because of an accommodation that you have, instead of taking 4 or 5 classes, you can take 3 classes and still be considered full time. And we're going to mention that a little bit later on in the presentation. Or maybe you are attending a transition program for 1 year and you're getting a feel, you're kind of getting ready, you're getting your feet wet, and to see what college is all about. And then the next year you go to college full time. Or there are even more options. Like the young man on the left, maybe you feel like you could take 2 college classes. One of them is in person on a college campus, and one of them is online, it's virtual, and you're still living at home. Maybe the next best step for you is to attend a district transition program of your high school. And while you're in that transition program, maybe you want to take one college class. Or for some students, going to college means they're going to a program, maybe it's a vocational program that prepares you for a job, but that program is on a college campus. So the good news is there are so many different ways to do college. And that's one of the messages I'd like you to take away from today's presentation is that there's a step for everyone. If you're thinking that you want to do college, there are lots of things to think about and consider. So this slide is one of my favorites in the entire presentation. So if you're a student and you're thinking, I want to go to college, I'm not really sure, how do I know? How do I know if I'm ready? So these four bubbles are four different parts of the college experience for you to think about. So starting in the bottom left corner, you might want to think about, is one college class right for me? Or am I ready? Do I feel like I could handle three or four college classes? And no matter what your answer is, there's a way to do college for you if you're ready for one or if you're ready for four classes. Then you want to think about the format. Some students learn best in person. They really need to be in a classroom, watching a teacher, watching a professor, getting help in person. But you might be the type of student who says, I can learn online. I like learning and taking classes and doing my homework at 9 in the morning. Maybe you're a night owl and you want to do homework at 9 p.m., but you like the flexibility. Another thing to think about is where you're going to live if you go to college. So some students say, I'm ready for the academics. I'm ready to take two or three classes. I'm ready to do it in person. But you know what? I'm just not ready to live on my own yet. I'm still building those independent living skills. And so I think I want to do the college classes, but I want to stay at home. And that's great. Something else to consider is the type of support that you might need taking college classes. So some students say that they need some help, or they might need some help with the content, with the reading and the writing of college academics. So in that case, you might be talking to your students about tutoring. Another type of support that we're going to talk about tonight in college are accommodations. So these are disability supports, such as extended time on a test, or getting a copy of notes, or taking a test in a distraction reduced environment, right? So those are accommodations. A third type of support that a lot of colleges have right now, not all of them, but some colleges have a learning coach or a success coach or an academic coach. And these people would help your students um, organize their homework assignments, put them into a schedule so your student knows when to do them. They might also help them break down a big assignment into small pieces. So again, this can be really helpful for those executive functioning skills. There are also some great transition programs that provide this kind of support. And then, there are private programs as well and private coaches. So just think about the type of support that your student might need in their college academics. The next thing we're going to talk about are some differences between high school and college. And these are some differences that you might have heard about before. But when I was making this slide, these are the things that students and families tell me the most often. These are the things that made the biggest difference to them, or that students were surprised about the most going from high school to college. And so after I share this slide, I'm going to pause for a moment and ask if there are any YAB young adults in this meeting that would like to volunteer and share your experience about these differences between high school and college. So first of all, in high school, you have a lot of classes during the day and it keeps you very busy. In college, you might have one class and then the rest of the day you're free. I know it can be hard to think about that now if you're in college. What would it be like if I was not busy during the day? It can be a lot of fun, but it can also be distracting and tempting if you have homework to do. In high school, teachers give reminders. They will tell you if you're missing an assignment, or they will tell you if you've turned in an assignment late. But in college, this usually does not happen. Teachers often expect you to be looking and knowing about your own assignments. And so they often don't give these prompts and these reminders that are usually so helpful in high school. This one is a little bit different. In high school, assignments and papers are often given in class. Yes, we do use Google Classroom in high school, but again, one of my daughters is in high school right now, and she still comes home with binders full of worksheets and papers and packets, and that's really not going to happen in college. In college, almost all of your assignments are going to be online. So for students who are used to having a folder and putting worksheets in the folder, coming home and looking, and holding the physical paper, a lot of college coursework is not tangible. And so that's a really big difference. Students also tell me that in high school, they're given a lot of time in class to do their assignments. So often students won't have any homework when they come home because they've done it all in class. And professors often have a flipped model of this in that they expect students to do work at home and then come in and talk about it during class. So there's not class time that's given to do homework typically, in college. A few other differences. So in high school, your family or caregivers might be the person that's communicating with the school. So you might have a dad or a grandma or a mom or an auntie who are communicating with a PPT team. They might be emailing your or calling the school and talking with your teachers. In college, you're the person that's going to be talking to your professors. Just you. Also, in high school, your teachers and your staff probably know that you have an IEP or they know that you have a 504. And I almost describe it like in high school, maybe you are walking around high school with a bubble around you, a bubble that some people can see, meaning that they know you have an IEP or a 504, and it's their job to provide the services and the supports that you need. In college, nobody knows on campus, no one knows that you have a disability unless you tell them. And that's called self disclosure. So you need to tell your professor if you need extended time on an exam. He or she is not going to know if you don't tell them. And I compare this to kind of walking around college with a bubble in your hand. You need to give that bubble to people. You need to show them and tell them that you need accommodations. Otherwise, people are not going to know. They're not going to be able to tell. And then lastly, one of the ways that you shared or you might share that you need disability support in high school is you have an IEP or a 504. In college, we don't use those words at all. In college, the document that tells people about your accommodations, it's called an accommodation letter. And we're going to show an example of that, later in the presentation. So I'm going to pause here right now and invite any of the young adult members to share your experience, if it's similar to any of these things that are on the screen, or if you had a different experience, something that surprised you going from high school to college. And feel free also to put your thoughts in the chat too. So if you don't want to unmute yourself, but you'd like to add your thoughts and experiences in writing in the chat, that's more comfortable for some of us. Please do that. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to talk about accommodations and how to get them in college. It's very different than high school. So this is a resource that I encourage you to look at if you have a young adult that's considering college or employment. This document shows ways to talk to your students about getting accommodations and talking to a professor, talking to an employer. It talks a little bit about what accommodations are, typically asked for in a workplace or a college setting. So if you're a young adult and you're not sure if you're thinking about college or employment or what's best for you, this is a great document for you no matter what you choose. And so the link to the document is down at the bottom of the slide.
We do have a message, and a question actually, in the chat. What if you have a power of attorney?
As far as communicating with a school, I'm wondering,
There was another one that says if you have a power of attorney or conservatorship, can you contact the professors or staff regarding assignments, extensions, help in class, and so forth?
okay, that's a great question. I can share what I do know. So colleges have a form, it's called the FERPA form. And that FERPA form allows your student, because they're the age of 18, to identify a person or persons that they would like to be able to communicate with the school and speak on their behalf. So every school, has this FERPA form. So I would highly encourage your student, and you to find that form when they go to college, and your name could be included, a therapist's name could be included, really anyone that the student identifies. And then they also can identify the type of information that they would like shared. It could be academic information, financial information. Um, so that would allow a parent or guardian to communicate with maybe an academic advisor or the disability support office. It is not encouraged for anyone to, other than a student, to speak to a professor. In fact, the professor may not respond, to an inquiry like that about assignments. They really like to direct all communication through the student, but they do encourage the student to maybe have someone else sitting in on a conversation, such as someone from a disability support office, or a student could email a professor and then they could CC, a parent or guardian on that email. That is a great question. So I would encourage you to seek out that FERPA form. It's FERPA, and then to ask your specific college about that question. That's a great question. So, very simply, these are the 4 steps to get accommodations in college. And I really tried to make it as simple as possible because it is so new. It's very different than sitting together as a multidisciplinary team and creating an IEP or a 504. So, after your student has applied and been accepted, so once they say, yes, I am going to Three Rivers Community College and I accept and I would like to be a student, then your student can go to the website. I encourage all students to do this themselves, to go to the search bar in the top right corner of a college's website and type in the word accommodation or type in the word disability. And usually the first result that pops up is the website you want to go to. So you're going to go to the website, the Accessibility Office website, and there's going to be a form on the website. Everything is really online now. So you're going to fill out this form that says, I am a student and I have a disability and I would like accommodations. Step 2, you're going to submit documentation. And I'll talk about some details of that on the next slide. Step 3, your student is going to have a conversation with a member of the accessibility office. It could be in person, it could be online, but your student is going to need to articulate and explain what their disability is and how it impacts them in the classroom or residentially. So this is a great thing to start practicing now. And then step 4, after those 3 steps are completed, the college, the accessibility office, is going to give your student one piece of paper, an accommodation letter. And this accommodation letter, it's not going to say what their disability is. It's just going to say, this is a student who's registered with our office, and we have said they're eligible to receive accommodations, and here are the accommodations. So that paper is all that needs to be given to your students' professors. That's it. 4 steps.
Just really quickly, I did put into the chat the Parents Guide to FERPA, so it explains a little bit more about what FERPA is and how to go about receiving those documents.
Great. Thank you, Laura. One of the most asked questions that I get about documentation in college is, can I bring my IEP or 504 to college? Do I need to share that? Can I share that? Does it need to be followed in college? So every college has a different policy. Most, I would say, across the board, and I work virtually with students in colleges and universities across the entire country, which I really enjoy because it gives me, a very current and relevant perspective about what most colleges and universities are doing. So most colleges will say, at a minimum, we need a letter from a pediatrician, from a physician, from a psychiatrist that has a diagnosis on it. They need a medical professional, and some schools will specify who this is and others will not. They say, this is a form, we need this form signed by your child's medical professional that says what their diagnosis is. And some schools, that's enough. Other schools say, once you have that form filled out, you are welcome to submit any other documents that you would like. So those documents could be your student's 504 or IEP. It could be a neuropsych evaluation, right? But it doesn't have to be. So most colleges are not going to ask you, can we see your student's 504 or IEP? They want a medical diagnosis. Now, this is my recommendation, what I have on the screen. If you have a medical professional who says, my student has autism, it is very helpful if they include suggested accommodations. And it just makes it easier, from another standpoint, right? If I were working in an accommodations office, that I have this letter and it says right here from a medical professional, the student has autism or anxiety or TBI or a medical condition, and here are the accommodations that will help that student be successful in college. That will make it very easy for me. Are there any questions, specific questions about this, about documentation? There usually are.
We do have one question. Are there colleges more friendly to those who have special needs? And if so, how would I get that information?
Oh, that's such a great question. So there are colleges that say that they are, historically supportive of neurodiverse students. Um, but I will tell you, most colleges and universities right now are creating very innovative and very supportive programs for young adults on their campus. So there are some big schools right now who have excellent support programs. UConn is one of them. They really have a variety of supports for all different types of students' needs. And you wouldn't think necessarily, because there's such a big public university, that they would be supportive. But I have quite a few colleagues there, and the services that they tell me that they have available to students are amazing. There are other really small colleges that do kind of pride themselves on having a really diverse student profile. And again, they're really innovative. Um, so, I do know that there are a couple of websites, and maybe I can share them with Laura after the presentation and she can share them with you. There are some groups that have kind of created a list or a database of schools and their support programs. There are also some really good Facebook groups as well that I'm a part of too. about transitioning neurodiverse students to college, and then families share their experiences about schools as well. So um, there's lots of ways, and um, I'd be happy to share what I know, with Laura to pass on to you after the presentation.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So, one of the questions I get asked is, how often do I need to ask for accommodations? And so, this is kind of a silly example, but this is an analogy. I really like coming up with analogies. This is an analogy for requesting accommodations. So, the first time you attend a college, you are going to need to go through those 4 steps that I described, right? Filling out a form on a website, submitting documentation, having a conversation. It's a little more intensive. It's kind of like buying a new or used car. It's a little time intensive. You need to have conversations. You're going to sign a lot of paperwork, but you only need to do it once or spend the most time upfront as you purchase that new or used car. Now, once you purchase that car, you're going to need to do regular maintenance, right? You're going to need to get gas. You're going to need to get an oil change, get the tires rotated, things aligned and balanced. That's similar to what you're going to do each semester. So at the beginning of each semester, your student is going to need to fill out a form online and get an accommodation letter. It's very simple. It's very fast. So the most time intensive part is kind of those 4 steps I described when you go to a college for the first time. But then after that, every semester, you're going to essentially kind of click a button, type a few things, and you're going to get a new accommodation letter to give to your new professors. So the image on the left is an example of an accommodation letter. It really is 1 page. It at the top it says, uh, "Dear Joey, you have been found eligible with our office to receive accommodations. Here are the accommodations you have been granted." And then the accommodations are listed, and it says, "If you have any questions, please reach out to our accessibility office." And that's it. So there's no IEP, there's no 504, there's not binders and binders and binders of documents that your student will need. They just need this one form, this accommodation letter. Now, on the right side of the screen, I put these 2 screenshots from our YouTube channel, Fast Forward College Coaching. We have a YouTube channel, and there are these 2 very short animated videos, but we created them to talk about accommodations in a really simple way. So to simplify this, I think they're both under 2 minutes. So it might be something that you want to take a look at. The top video is, how to sign up for accommodations. So those 4 steps. And then the bottom video is, what do you do with an accommodation letter, and how do you, talk to your professor about your accommodations? Do we have any questions before we go on?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
One question asked, does the letter need to be signed by a doctor?
It does need to be signed. Again, the specific medical professional will vary between colleges. So some colleges will simply put the word "a qualified medical professional," and then some other colleges might say it needs to be signed by a pediatrician or someone with an MD designation. So I would check your specific college.
And we do have a second question. Your professional opinion, do you think it is best for a person with special needs to room on campus or find a college closer to home? I think that depends.
I completely agree with you, Laura.
Yes.
Yeah, it really depends on your student and I would say, talking through having a conversation with someone, like even like CPAC or myself, and we'll just kind of ask you different questions about your young adult and their ability to, live independently, self-advocate, communicate, all of there's a variety of different questions that can help us give you some more information to make that decision about what's best for your student.
I completely agree. Yes.
Um, I see someone has a hand up, Laura. Is that another question?
Renee, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Jen, thank you so much for being here for this. So when an individual might have a diagnosis that changes or needs that change, and so the accommodations really should be updated, it would be appropriate. Would the student then need to go, wherever they did that one-time letter to present those new diagnosis, get a new letter? What does that look like?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So sometimes students might get a new diagnosis, and it could be a new diagnosis of anxiety. It could be a new diagnosis because the student fell and twisted their ankle and they need some accommodations. So, regardless, if your student's situation changes for any reason, yes, so they should absolutely bring new documentation and then they can go back to the accessibility office and ask for additional accommodations. So students can do that at any time. In fact, if students receive their accommodation letter and they realize that there is something not on the letter that they feel would be helpful, colleges do have an appeal process. And so typically it's just providing maybe new or more in-depth documentation or a student saying, maybe I didn't express myself clearly in the conversation we had. This thing is really helpful to me and it's not on my accommodation letter. Can you reconsider that? Yep. So at any time, if a student's diagnosis changes or they may have a new class where it would necessitate them asking for a new accommodation, at any time they can do that.
Thank you. And a follow-up, and if you're going to get to this, please tell me, tell me, just hang on. When presenting these letters, if there's a circumstance where a professor is not honoring the accommodation or says that they won't, what that process would look like.
Yep. Yep. Another great question. That does happen occasionally. And typically, the first thing that should happen is the student should approach the professor either in writing or verbally, and remind that professor that they've been given an accommodation letter and notified the student of been notified of the student's accommodations. The student, it might be a misunderstanding, and the student may need to share. Um, a little bit more, about the accommodation letter. I always encourage students to have a conversation as awkward or uncomfortable as that can be with a professor. Um, so that would be the first step is the student talking to the professor. I would say the next step is the student reaching out to the accessibility office and asking them to, you're making them aware of the situation, and then maybe they can approach the professor, or maybe they can be an intermediary and be present in a meeting between the student and the professor. Sometimes there's miscommunications that happen. I tend to, err on the side of faculty maybe not understanding or not knowing what accommodations are rather than intentionally not providing them. um, but again, this should all be funneled through the student. A professor is not going to have a conversation with a parent. They're going to have a conversation with a student, and then if support is needed, as I mentioned, with a member of the accessibility office. And then there are steps beyond that if a student still feels like their needs or are not being supported. But that would be the first line is communicating in person, and then step two, getting the accessibility office involved.
Thank you.
Yep, great questions. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a worksheet that I created. It's in one of the workbooks that I've written, and I created this worksheet because when I was kind of starting in this field, maybe gosh, 15 years ago, um, it was really a mystery. The language of accommodations in college was very secret, and I thought it was difficult for students going to college to ask for accommodations if they didn't know what the accommodations were called. It's hard to ask for something if you don't know the words to use. So I created this. This is not an exhaustive list, meaning there may be other things that other colleges provide. But this is just really great if you're saying, well, I have my student's IEP, but Jen, you're saying that my college is not going to recognize this IEP. So how do I know, how does my student know what to ask for? So the box on the left are testing accommodations. In a test or exam situation, what does your student need to be successful? I would say the most used accommodations are extended time, um, use of a computer, if it's a handwritten exam, and a distraction reduced environment. In a classroom setting, so every day in a class, your student may qualify for these accommodations. Maybe they want preferential seating. Maybe they want to sit near the front of the room. Maybe they would like copies of notes, of lecture notes or PowerPoint. Maybe they would like to be able to record lectures. Those are all classroom accommodations. And in the box on the bottom, if your student has a medical or residential needs, they're going to follow the same exact process we talked about, those same 4 steps. They're going to go through the same office. So if your student has dietary needs or allergies, they're going to go through the same process. If your student is requesting a single room, the same process. If your student has physical or mobility issues and they're requesting a first floor room or a first floor room with a private bathroom or an air conditioner or adjustments to some of the furniture, in their dorm room, they would follow the exact same process. They would get an accommodation letter as well. Everything is the same. Okay, so we're going to talk about some transition skills and activities, college readiness activities, and I would like to leave about 5 minutes for any questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So, parents and educators, these are things you can be doing tomorrow to help your student become independent, great self advocates, and ready for college or employment. Okay. So this is really an observation, a professional observation. Navigate well, it's also based in research, but I'm not going to share that tonight. But students really need to be able to navigate technology. Think about, in your own work, how often you check your email, how often your job tasks are communicated via email. So students will need to start developing habits on their own of checking email once a day, checking their online portal once a day. I even think practicing navigating websites is really important because if your student is taking a algebra class at a community college, most math courses have a separate supplemental website that they use. So your student will need to navigate to something like Google Classroom, although it's not called Google Classroom in college, but they'll need to navigate to that portal. And then for their math class, go to a second portal and remember that username and password to complete their homework assignments. And then students may need to take an exam online. And depending where your student goes, they may need to download a lockdown browser on their computer so that they can't navigate to websites while they're taking the online exam. So think about your young adult and all of those technology steps. So this might be a skill you want to start working on right now. Is your student checking emails, navigating their Google Classroom by themselves, going to a college website and saying, all right, let's find the day that classes start. How do you think we would find that? And letting your student be the person who navigates the website. Okay, this looks very familiar to some of us. We go to school, we go home and play video games, we avoid the things we need to be doing. We have a crisis late at night and we start panicking and becoming overwhelmed. We go to bed very late, we get up and we do the same thing again. A lot of students who procrastinate and struggle with executive functioning skills, time management, they can really relate to this, as well as the next slide. So this idea came from a really great TED Talk called Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator. The picture on the left was his plan. He had a paper due. In his mind, he thought, well, I'm just going to do a little bit over time. But what actually happened in reality was he did nothing, 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 and then I think stayed up for 24 hours the night before it was due. So a lot of our students have really good intentions and they want to start things early, but the reality is they put it off and procrastinate until the very last minute. Um, and this can be a problem if in high school they were allowed to submit late assignments. Colleges, that's not necessarily the case. So the executive functioning skill we're talking about is task initiation, getting started on things, doing things we don't want to do, right? As adults, we know that. I don't always feel like taking out the garbage, but I can't put that off for very long. I try, but I can't put it off. So, this is a great skill to start working on with your young adults. How do you do things when you don't feel like it? And then asking kind of this question at the bottom, can your student initiate? Can they start hard tasks or boring assignments? Or do they avoid them, deny them, escape, do something else? Because when they're in college, yes, they'll be able to take some classes that are interesting to them, but they also are going to be taking classes that are not interesting, that are just requirements. And I've had an experience where many, many students kind of avoid those classes or just don't like to start um, because it's not interesting to me. So, this is a great thing you can start working on. And there's a great activity on the next slide. It sounds very simple, but again, this is based in research and it really does work. Telling students to start or try a difficult task just for 5 minutes. Just for 5 minutes. So many students tell me, once I get the ball rolling, Jen, I'm fine. But it really feels insurmountable to start that difficult thing. Going to the gym, if I can just put my shoes on and get in the car, I'm going to go. But it's just the thought of getting started. So as a coach, this is what I do with students a lot is, hey, let's take out that assignment. Let's do it for 5 minutes. Let's just get it started together. And this can be applied to, to anything at home. Let's clean your room. We're going to set a timer and we're just going to do it for 5 minutes. But this is really a skill that is so important to college success is doing those things you don't feel like doing. All right, we only have a couple more. Another really important skill is time management. I don't believe that there's one correct system that everyone should use. I really believe that, everyone's brain is different. We all think differently. And so the system that you use to keep track of your meetings and your assignments can be different than my system, but we all need a system. And you can get really creative with these systems. So some students really like technology. If your student is tech savvy, let's talk about Google Calendar. Let's talk about Notion. Let's talk about Todoist. There are a lot of programs out there. If your student does not like technology, they're not tech savvy, maybe they have poor fine motor skills, using a planner, using a whiteboard with post-it notes, that's a system. um, Maybe you want to create something and then your student prints it out and hangs it on their wall like the picture on the slide. Maybe they use dictation and they dictate reminders to themselves. Whatever the system is, your student will need to find something that helps them to organize and keep track. When I hear someone say, but I just keep it all in my head, Jen, that doesn't work really well in college. So we need a system. Okay. Two more skills that I'd like to mention are being social and self-advocacy, and then we'll have some time for questions. So I have noticed in the last couple of years, perhaps since COVID, maybe, um, that students have a difficult time leaving their room and attending activities and making friends. And I know that a lot of colleges and universities are talking about this. They're talking about how to engage students and get them out of their rooms. Last year, I moved my daughter into college, and I think I bought her a doorstop, and I said, "Hey, let's put this doorstop in here. Let's leave your door open, and that way people can walk down the hall and can see you and say hi." And she said, "Ew, mom, that's weird. Nobody does that." I'm like, "Well, how else are you going to make friends? How are you going to see people in your hallway?" So the things maybe that we used to do or we're told to do, it's just it's different. So I'm also finding that students feel like their classes are required, which is true, and everything else is optional, which is true. Um, But because they're not required to go, I find students really choose to stay in their room. They don't like putting themselves out there, and first of all, knowing what activities are going on, and then second, having the confidence to attend them. So one of the things that I would do is start, asking your young adults, what are the things that you like doing? What are the things that you do in high school? What do you do when you come home? What are the things that make you happy or excited? And once they have that list, have them go on their college's website and see if there are activities that are offered, clubs, and seeing if there's an events calendar. Next slide, please. So way back in the day, I used to get a flyer slipped under my door or posted on a bulletin board. Here are the activities that are going on. Now, and these are actual examples from different colleges in Connecticut. Every college or university has a different way of promoting their events. So some schools, you may need to go on the website. There may be a certain website that you need to find to know what events are going on. UConn, they have all kinds of social media channels. And so if you want to know what's going on with a club, it's not going to be posted on a website, but you have to follow on social media. And some of our students aren't on social media, right? So that could be a challenge. Other schools have an app and they only post their clubs and activities on an app. And so your student needs to download that app and check that app. So every school is different. So I would say, not always to assume that your students don't want to socialize, but truly they may not know the events that are going on. They may not know how to connect with their school's activities. And then you can work on the self-confidence to join an activity where they may not know somebody and make connections. And then that connects to self-advocacy. So you've probably heard many times throughout the presentation when I've said your student needs to, or students. If there are students on the call today, I'm so proud of you. Even if you were made to be here by your parent or guardian, I'm so proud of you for being here because this is a first step in finding out things that are going to help you to be successful. And so once you find those things that help you to be successful, then you need to do them and to ask for them. So I want you to start practicing. I'm talking to the young adults right now. I want you to start practicing scheduling your own doctor and dentist and medical appointments. Yep, I know. I know. Picking up the phone, I know. Talking to a real person on the other end of the phone and making an appointment. Yes, your next physical or medical appointment, I want you to schedule that appointment. You can have your parent or guardian sitting right next to you. That's okay. I want you to, order food in restaurants, talk about how to leave a tip, right? Order delivery. Maybe you do that already. I want you to send emails, send professional emails. So every email that I get from my high school daughter's school, I forward right to her email, everything, pretty much every single thing that I get. And then I follow up and ask her a couple times a week, hey, have you checked your emails? Let's write back to that person. Let's write back to that teacher. And often when she says, I'll do it later, it's because she doesn't know exactly what to say. So I can sit right next to her and say, well, I don't know. What do you think you would say? How would you start? Or let me give you the first sentence and then you finish the next sentence. But sending a professional email or responding to a text that maybe even a family member sends you a text and you respond right away, those are good things to start practicing. Talking to your teachers in high school, just talking to them, really, and saying hello, asking a question about a test, asking about a grade that you received, asking them to meet you after school to talk about something. That's great practice for when you're going to talk to your professors and maybe visit them in office hours. So you can start practicing that. You can also start talking to people and practicing that conversation about what your disability is and how it impacts you. Right. So, I mean, we all have strengths. And so it's really talking about this. I have this thing, this disability. I have this condition and it makes me really tired. Or I have this condition and it makes me nervous when I take a test around other people. So this is really a combination of self-awareness, right? Knowing who you are, knowing the ways that you learn, the ways that you work best, and then practicing being able to say them to somebody else. Being able to practice, this is who I am, and these are the things that I need to help me be successful. And it's okay if you put those words in your phone and you just read that to your mom or to your dad or your grandma every day, and you just read right off your phone. That's okay, because that's practice with you using that language that you're going to need, when you go to college. Mm. So to everyone, to students, to families on the call, you've got this. College is really exciting. And again, there are lots of ways to do college. So if you have a student who's thinking about it or you have more questions, please reach out to CPAC. On the next slide is my contact information. You can reach out to me and ask questions as well. There are a lot of resources out there, and I think Laura shared some resources on the CPAC website. So there's a lot out there, and please don't be afraid to ask questions. We'll answer your question, and if we don't know, we will find out the answer.
Thank you so much, Jen. I did actually post several resources, our youth advisory board information on that, our YouTube link, our transition newsletter. I did also put the differences between high school and college and some of the resources for check it out. And if you have any questions, certainly unmute, ask, and or email us, whichever you prefer. While we're asking questions, I'm just going to launch a poll, and if you can just answer our poll, we would be happy to hear what you have to say. Any suggestions? We actually look at it and value your opinion.
I just want to say thank you, Jen. Your presentations are always so interesting and on point. And I know we have a couple of youth advisory board members on the call today, and I'm just proud of everyone who's here. It's great to know what to know.
Thanks, Lois.
Lois, did you want to put your email in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out to you for the Youth Advisory Board? So put my,
I highly encourage any youth that are on the call today to join the Youth Advisory Board. Not only do you get to work with Lois, but it's a great leadership opportunity. It's a great social opportunity to meet other young adults. And I hear they have fun too.
Yeah, we have 3 upcoming presentations that I'm very excited about. The year is starting off with a bang.
do have a question. Can a parent or guardian participate in the meeting with the student in the school as they advocate for themselves and accommodations? If you can just, do you mean college or high school? College.
That's a great question. Every school is different. So I've just encouraged you to ask, your student's particular college. Sometimes colleges do, in that initial meeting, they will allow, especially, well, I guess both virtually or in person, they will allow an adult to kind of sit in on the meeting. They will direct their conversations to the student. So they will talk to the young adult, but then, they may ask, if the caregiver has anything else that they'd like to add. So some schools do, some don't.
Okay, we do have a question. When can we join the youth meeting? So they do meet every month. And let me see if I have the actual flyer. Lois, do you have the actual flyer for next month's?
Let me check.
Okay. We'll post that. But you can also reach out to Lois and she can share the info, or anyone at CPAC, and we could share the information.
Our next meeting is February 11th, and if you reach out to me, I'm going to see if I can add the link to join the Youth Advisory Board in the chat. And if you do that, if you follow that information and reach out to me that way, I can make sure that I can put you on the email list to join even the after the evening meetings as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.